Hey everybody,
Hey.
this is Molly, if you don't know her. Grace is trying to get it. Alright, we're just waiting on a few more people to show up who are like getting coffee and stuff. We're telling you, alright. Oh cool, I've already got people joined. Sweet.
Wait, this is like, oh wow.
What?
We're gonna be famous.
I know, so whatever you say, the million...
Oh, Reynolds is live now.
Whoa!
Oh, you guys, we should watch it.
It'd be funny if
Yeah,
you
we
stopped
should all
watching.
watch it.
I saw it. Oh my gosh, I
viewers.
can't believe it. This happened. Yeah. It's like I'm anonymous. Okay, yeah. It's a great question. No. Yeah, it's okay. Alright, anyway, so I guess we'll just kind of, people will come and go. So I know some of y'all have to leave, so don't feel like awkward if you just gotta get up and leave. So thank y'all for coming. I just kind of wanted to do this talk because a couple of things just recently have been coming up in discussions. I think it's a really important topic. So obviously I'm going to be talking about science and religion, mostly the harmony they have together, but obviously I want to address what are the arguments that are out there. What's kind of the challenge that pretty much all of y'all are facing. If y'all are familiar with Bishop Robert Barron, he says like one of the main reasons why like college kids, young people are leaving the church is because they seem to notice there's a contradiction between faith and religion, between what the church says, what science says. Obviously, they're not understanding the full question or what's really going on, but that's their perception. Part of it is that our world is telling them that there is a contradiction there. So one of the things I want to address is kind of that falsehood that's out there with that. Bring up kind of what is good about us thinking of God, not just from faith. Obviously, pretty much all of us know about God from faith. What we've been told by our parents, what we've been told by the church, what we've read in the Bible. That belief completely and totally is given to us by faith. We just trust, right? We just really have to trust it. But the importance of knowing and understanding God through reason is we can't substitute that. One of the big councils of the church was called the First Vatican Council. Actually said that knowing God by reason is what we call one of the preambula fide, which means it's the preamble to faith. So before you can even believe by faith, you have to know with reason. And this has been a discussion that's gone on way before even Christianity was established by Christ. This whole seeking to know and understand a higher power by our own minds, our own abilities to think and to reason. There was one scientist, or no, he was kind of pre-scientist, and he said that learning about God through reason, essentially what it is, it's our search through creation for the Creator, whereas faith is understanding the Creator entering into creation to search for us. So you're kind of looking at two sides of the same coin when we're looking at faith and reason. How they both are going to offer something that's going to complete the whole picture. So essentially, I'll just kind of dive into it. When we talk about reason, we're talking about our ability to know, to understand, our minds, our ability to make logical connections. We would say that God has given every single man that capacity. Every man has that within them innately. Ability to think, to reason. It's what makes us different than animals. Animals have, an intuition of, okay, by like nature, they just kind of know, to migrate. Animals know to hibernate. They don't know why. They don't understand the reason why. They don't kind of have like a real self-drive to it. They just do it because it's kind of put in there. We have been created in a way that we can know not just our end, but know like why, and we can choose to seek it on our own. Aristotle, who's kind of like the main philosopher, he said that every creature has sort of it's an end that it's seeking. So like a rock is created with its end to be like rock. That's like the end of rock is to be a rock. Like the best way a rock can be a rock is by being a rock, not by being bread, not by being, a fish. It's when it's a rock, it's completing its creation. An animal, which is kind of a step up, its creation is finished when it's able to reproduce, when it's able to, kind of find a mate and reproduce. That's the height of its creation. A plant, whenever it's able to grow and produce fruit. So each thing seeks after its certain end. Man, though, seeks to know, understand. Is that a message someone sent me? So we seek to know and understand. That's, again, like our natural desire. It's from creation who we are. And so by that, we also can come to know, like, where did we come from? Where are we going? Why do we exist? And so, I mean, that discussion's gone on, I won't go all the way into the philosophy of it. But, there's been all these discussions of, what are we made of? What's the world made of? Water, air, fire, earth, different combinations of all those things. All of them trying to just seek and understand this reality. All of them, though, base their observations on the world around us. So, philosophy and really science all found its basis in the created world. Okay, so they didn't start with ideas, they didn't start with thoughts, they started with what they could observe and see. So again, they noticed, I get thirsty, I need to drink water. Okay, so then that must mean that I'm made of water, right? Or, when I get upset, I get hot. Or when I get sick, I get hot. So there must be some element of fire within me. So all these different realities they understood and perceived through their senses. That's basically how philosophy kind of got built, and how science ultimately got built was, okay, you observe the world around you, you observe nature, you observe kind of how things play, cause and effect, and then you make a conclusion, right? Okay, so, I burn a stick and it makes fire, all right? Now I'm going to try and burn a rock. It doesn't make fire, all right? So, they kind of just build conclusions by that, and that's essentially how kind of knowledge started to grow, was knowing, understanding, practicing, trying. Eventually that became the scientific method. So science, by its nature, has kind of a limitedness to the observable world, to what we can test, what we can see. So that's the first, thing when we talk about science, is that science deals with creation, deals with nature, but it's limited. Science has a limited sphere to it. It's not all-encompassing. So that's going to be really, really important when it does come later on to have these discussions with other people. Because science has a working with what's observable, what's created, how I can test it and see if it's going to try and happen again. Science also works in our real world, right? So again, a test of all right, let's, see if, what was the example? So you've probably heard of it. Kids who watch violent cartoons become violent, right? Okay, they can do a survey, they can test 40 kids and see how many of them, after watching these violent cartoons, become violent. Okay, but they're not also testing that maybe those kids had a tendency beforehand to being violent. Maybe they already had some kind of, maybe they wanted to watch that because they already were feeling violent. So there's you can't test it in a bubble, essentially. Everything is sort of connected in our world. So that's the second thing with science, is that it's not it tests in the world, but it tests in the real world. So the world as it actually is. So then, let me see where I'm going with that from there. Sometimes I get tired of my thoughts. Peace out, Allison. Thanks for coming. Where was I going with that? Okay, yeah, so science, by that definition, can only point back to what we'd understand in creation, and what is there, what has been created, what we can sense and understand. So science, for years and years, was used to point back to the Creator. Science and reason has been able to point to a Creator, the first mover, as you probably heard of him. The all these different kind of realities, but it's still contingent on the fact of creation. So understanding creation reality, how it is, that's then helped all the philosophers of the past understand God himself. Well, when Christianity enters in, it doesn't discard that. It doesn't discard what that philosophy and that reason did, because again, it saw that like there's some truth to it. Like if it's true, then it has to point to God. Hey Taylor, how's it going? No, it's free now. Someone just left, but so yeah, so we kind of already started, but
Yeah, you go ahead.
it's all right. Yeah. Just seeing if people are asking questions here. Anyway, so when Christianity enters in, it doesn't discard what science and philosophy had understood, but it takes that extra element of revelation in. So what is God saying about himself to us? So that's the other thing we have to understand about, science on this side, but religion on this side, is that religion and faith, we're dealing with a totally different tenet of truth. It's all truth, but it's like comparing apples and oranges. So again, science is dealing with what we understand, observe in our world, contain in our world, as the world is, as I understand it, and as I'm able to sense and perceive it. What God is going to speak and is going to say is going to be him, revealing from the outside inward. So they're not really comparable. They complement, but they're not comparable. Does that make sense? Everyone's clear on that. So essentially, the early Christians took those two and saw them like building upon each other. Again, like through reason, I quest for God, I quest for a creator, I quest for my end. But at the same time, like I said earlier, God is on a quest for me as well. Outside, inward. We call him transcendent. So God being a transcendent being, by that literal word, means he kind of exists beyond a chasm that I can't reach on my own. Galileo was, he was one of the greatest scientists of his time, and he was criticized by the church because he made a claim that there's actually nothing up there in space. There's nothing up there in heaven, and the church got spooked when he started saying that, because it's like, no, God's up there, God is up there. But it was kind of like he was saying God is not like a puppet master, up there pulling strings. He's not up there whirling planets around and stuff like that. There's forces up there. There's gravity. There's electromagnetic forces moving things around. But we don't see that God is like an element or an object of our universe. That was ultimately his big claim. And so there was confusion because again, people in that day were kind of they didn't really get a full development of that separation between the science and religion. So they got really confused. So that's why the church kind of cracked down on Galileo. But what he was saying, what he was ultimately getting at, is something that the church has embellished more throughout the years. God is transcendent, and so yeah, he's very much a part of our universe. He's very much present, but he's not a part of our universe. So when we talk about pantheism, that means everything is God and God is everything. That tree is you've seen Avatar, right? How there's this big brain under the planet, and it's sort of that's pantheism essentially. And so that's not how we view God. God is present everywhere, but he's a transcendent being. So he exists outside of that created universe. This ultimately gets back to what did we believe him as the creator? You can't basically one of the principles of philosophy is you can't create yourself, because to create yourself means you have to have already existed, which is contradictory, because then you didn't create yourself because you were already existing. So something had to exist before. So basically, God couldn't create himself in the universe because that's contradictory, because it's saying that God existed before, but he created himself. And now I'm not getting into the Father, Son, Holy Spirit reality. This is because even that we don't say that Jesus was ever created by the Father, or we never say the Holy Spirit was created by them. We say, the reality of he was begotten, which kind of was for the intent of trying to pull out that temptation of saying like Jesus was a part of creation, or Jesus was like one of the creations of God. No, he is God, and so by that he is also transcendent. So essentially, we look at kind of the world in the sense of, it's an image I've used before, of like the painter and the painting. So the painting is the creation, okay? It's a two-dimensional reality. It's I can actually, I'll use this dude. I don't know who this guy is. Anyway, so like Home Slice here. I'll show this for the kiddies on the video. I don't really know who he is, but he's a painting, right? Or whatever, print out. Okay, so he's two-dimensional. Now this doesn't mean that when he's like looking out, he's looking out at us. No, because his looking out is looking out in this world. He has only two ways he can look out: left, right, up, down. That's like for him his existence. So we can see everything because we're three-dimensional, right? We step out and we can see the whole thing. But for him, in his world, in his two-dimensional world, that reality doesn't exist. He can't see himself. He can't see all that. He can simply see, what's here and there. So what he observes really are one-dimensional things. He sees lines. He sees dots, stuff like that. The three-dimensional figure, the painter, exists outside of the painting, and so can see but also be present to the entirety of his painting in a very different way than the painting. But also, how much of me can he observe? How much of me can the painting observe? Nothing. He can't observe anything because I'm outside of one of his dimensions. Now I am 3D, so that means I include 1 and 2 dimensions. So if I do this, what can he now see? He can now perceive me acting in the painting. So he can perceive, but he still only perceives a two-dimensional effect. He can still only perceive something in his limited realm. So again, go back to what I was saying earlier. Science understands the world as it is, limited in the world, in that kind of contained reality as it is. So what science ultimately can see and perceive are what we say the effects of God. But we can't perceive the Creator himself because he exists outside of that. We can perceive the effects. So like, if I came and I drew a little smiley face right here, he would all of a sudden be able to observe that. I'm not going to do that because it's not my picture. But he would be able to see that, right? He would be able to see the effect. Or if I tore this painting, if I tore this picture, he would be able to see that, right? He would perceive that in his world. But for him to necessarily say that that was the painter might be difficult. But what he could do is he could connect and point it back to the effects of there being a creator. So that's ultimately also where science does meet its limit, that it can't get to that point of saying, haha, I see the creator as he is, because it's limited. It has that limited spectrum. That's as far as it can go. That's as much as it can see. It's as much as it can perceive. Faith, though, which again is the painter going to the painting, can reveal a full picture. So if somehow I could speak to my painting, or somehow in his realm interpret to him about me, that would be the fullness of truth, right? Because I'm not only containing maybe what's in his world, but the extra that is of me. So that's the aspect of faith. That faith, religion, deals with that spectrum, of what has God, what has the Creator given to me, what has he implanted and told about himself to us, or about the world around. Now reason, like I said, can make a lot of those movements back to the Creator, to point to him. And there's a lot of those great things. So a lot of philosophy has gone back to kind of what I was saying earlier, this thought of there being a first mover. So, basic physics, an object in motion stays in motion. An object at rest stays at rest, unless it's acted upon by an outside force. So basically, yeah, for something to be moved out of rest, it has to be moved by something that itself is already in motion. So it's presuming also that whatever has been moved was moved by something that's already moving. Did you follow that? Okay. So, all right. So that thing was moved by something that was moved. Okay, well then by that same token, that thing that was moved must also be moved by something else that was in motion. And it goes back and back and back and back. Essentially what philosophy proposes is that we can't go on that route forever. Because we can observe a definite beginning and a definite end to like our world and to effects and to actions, there must be a beginning. There must be a starting point. There must be what we would say the unmoved mover. So the one who moved everything but himself was not moved. Again, it's like I was saying, like God didn't have to create himself, in order to move the world. We would say he is that first mover. And now it's like Thomas Aquinas was kind of the big guy who talked about a lot of this and put it all together. He said, again, this being we call God. And he used that specifically, again, to like designate terms. When we're talking about God, we're not talking about the mythological God. We're not talking about God of those. When we talk about God, this is the being we're talking about, an unmoved mover, something that's outside of that created world. One of the other ones, can you show us? Oh, sorry, people want to see who's here. Want to say hi? I don't know if y'all actually can see who is here. There were like 50 more people here before I showed this camera, so y'all know that this has been popular. What was it? Oh yeah. So Aquinas, he made these proofs for God, but he didn't make them from the position of like reason first and then faith first and then reason. He started with reason and then moved up to faith. Another one he went with is the kind of the argument for telos. So it's sort of like, again, everything has within it something that it seeks towards. So again, like I was saying with the rock and stuff, that rock, is going to seek to be a rock, and it's going to seek to stay a rock, and it's going to seek to stay at the bottom of that ocean. The tree, every single tree, you don't have to teach the tree like how to grow, how to make fruit, how to make leaves, how to do photosynthesis. It has it within it. Same thing like I was saying with the animals. You don't have to teach a dog how to, make puppies. I mean, anyway. So, like, that stuff is there by instinct. Like, so, yeah, anyway, this is a PG talk. So, all those things are present, but by the same principle as the first mover, it can't put its own in within it, because like nature determines sort of like basically like the nature of the thing determines its end. So again, like big, bulky, heavy, rocky, unmoving, unmoldable. Okay, the end of that object is going to be rock, to just sit there and do that. Tree, which is bendy, green, kind of stretchy, all that stuff. It's that kind of like format is going to make it have a certain end of growing. So the nature sort of also determines it. So again, basically creation has a certain action of determining that end as well. When we talk about that, like Aristotle brought up this thing called the four causes. So there's the efficient cause, the formal cause, the material cause, and the final cause. And he says all of those really kind of act together. So the efficient cause is what made the thing to be. Unmoved mover, essentially. Unmoved mover, we can say start that. But I could be an efficient cause of, if I'm chopping down a tree to make a house. I'm the efficient cause because I'm making that. Then there is the material cause. So what the thing is, like what's its characteristics, what's it's made of. Formal cause is like really like what form the thing takes. So take a chair. Like if I'm going to make a chair, like I have to format it a certain way. Like I can't make a chair that's long and pointy, right? Like it's not going to be a chair. It's not going to work well. Then the last one is the final cause. So what the thing is going to do. And so as we say, the final cause is the first in intention, but it's the last in execution. So like the efficient cause, the one who's making it, knows what he's making it for. So when I'm making chair, I am making it in a certain form, but I also know what's the end I'm making it for, and I do all the creation and the material for that end. So all of those those four causes work together. So that's the thing is like if we can observe that again, over and over and over again, there are things in our world that will go to a certain end and will seek that end and will, a tiger shark will not all of a sudden just like start blooming flowers on it. Like, that won't happen. And I can guarantee you, you can go to any aquarium in the world, that will not happen. Because there's a certain creation with that end and everything. And so, like I was saying, since we can't create ourselves, we also, by that same means, can't put that end in us. We can't create our own end in us, which is going to be important whenever we get to understanding people, that we have a certain end we have to seek. And even though we have freedom to seek that end, I really can't choose what my end is, right? Like, I can't choose to say, like, you know what, I'm going to become an eagle. I'm going to climb up that building, I'm going to jump off it and become an eagle. I mean, unless you're an eaglet or dancing. You're the eaglets or the eagle, whatever. Okay. Sorry. Refuel. Is everyone clear as mud on everything so far? Any
Clear as
questions?
mud.
All right, everything's good. So, in understanding all this,
Yeah.
what?
Nothing.
Okay, yeah. So for a long time, that's how kind of we say sort of like the pyramid of knowledge was built up. Is that there was science that was really kind of on the bottom. We understand, we observe, all that stuff. Then we build up to like kind of mathematics, which is sort of like, okay, now that we've observed all this stuff, and I see that like, 1 plus 1, that's 2. Whoa. And so not only does this reality exist in the world, but now I can actually think, and I can say 1 plus 1 equals 2. That's math, right? So math kind of becomes when we take science and what's observable and sort of make those mathematical principles out of it. So that's kind of the second rung of the ladder. From that, we then move up to like art and like technology. So again, like an engineer, what's he gonna do? He's gonna kind of make a bridge of all of that. Like, okay, so like, this street and this dynamic of this city, I need to design all that. So he's going to use mathematics, but he's also going to kind of combine it with like the real world and stuff like that. Or a painter. A painter is going to like be able to use their mind and their creativity, but also is going to have to know like, all right, like geometry and like figures and stuff like that. Like, I would love to say that like my little like stick man is art, but it's really not, because I don't make good proportions and stuff like that. Like I don't have that ability to make all that. And so basically we move all the way up. And then on the top of the pyramid is what we get to, again, is what we would call, next would be metaphysics. So metaphysics, the name literally means beyond nature. So Greek meta means like after or beyond. Physica, so physics, means nature. So again, physics is studying nature. Metaphysics is going beyond that. So it is when we start saying, okay, what is beyond the nature? What is past all this stuff? What's kind of within it? The very, very top of that, even beyond that, is theology. It's kind of the king of it all, because again, it's like I said, it's the preamble. It's the preamble of belief. All this stuff is led up and pointed to that, what faith reveals. And so it all connects. So when we put it up there, ding, it's not just kind of like all right, God has told me truth, and that kind of trumps everything. It's not like, hey, faith is like it's the ace of spades that kind of beats everyone else's hand. No, it's also what puts everything else in harmony. And it's really important to understand that knowing about God, knowing about theology, really at the end of the day is going to make harmony of everything else, because God is the efficient cause. God is knows the final cause. God is, the painter. God is the transcendent. So he knowing him and what he has revealed of himself also kind of makes sense of everything else. And so for hundreds of years of the church's history, that was how everything lived. Until we get to a man named René Descartes. You know about him? A little bit, not much.
No.
Okay. All right. René Descartes' big thing was essentially he was locked in France. It was like a cold winter. He was sitting alone in his house, freezing to death, and he had nothing to see and do but just to think. And he started thinking and thinking and thinking. And so remember, like what I was saying before, all of science and philosophy always started with sensing up, and then thoughts and principles, concepts came later. So he starts thinking and says, how do I know that everything didn't just start existing 5 seconds ago? How do I not know that there is this thing he called this evil genie who is just putting this thought in my head of all these people in this room and this building, and that he's creating all this stuff, but really it doesn't exist outside. How do I know? And he starts kind of having like a mental breakdown, basically. And so basically what he gets to says is like, I don't know. I don't know that none of that happened, but one thing I do know is that I can doubt. And I can doubt and I can challenge all of these thoughts. And so what he eventually did was he basically took that pyramid and said, I'm going to reconstruct this whole thing. And basically he turned it upside down. Pow! And first of all, he knocked theology off. Pow! And then he started from the bottom up. And he started with thoughts. What's out there and how does that create this stuff in here? So he started out there and then moved in here, but not God. He didn't start with God because God is the evil genie. I can't trust God because he could do whatever he wants, and he could change all these rules on me. So I don't like God anymore. So pow, I'm gonna knock him out. So he starts with this metaphysics of like, I can kind of like create, okay, so I know what is out there, and then he just starts like building from there. And so then eventually that tells me why I see things the way they are. So he started that, and it's called this Cartesian philosophy of basically like you starting the mind and then kind of like move out. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but that effect became tremendous on like the rest of scientific research from there, because one, there then at that point became a big disconnect between faith and reason. They became seen as opponents to each other, but also the way that they did science was no longer what it used to be. Like I said, it used to be, okay, like I go to touch fire, fire hot, I burn hand, fire must be hot, wood in fire, wood, stuff like that. But now, he started saying things like, oh, well, fire maybe, what if, like, I don't know. I don't even want to try and get into René Descartes' head. But, essentially, like, you get the picture, right? Dude, they got, like, crazy hair. Or they can walk behind, Look. Okay. Sorry. So, essentially, like, that became, like, a huge war that was then faced basically for the rest of the church. Because then after them, you get all these other crazy philosophers that I'm not even really going to get into, because some of their stuff is just so, I mean, it's really wigged out. Like, if you ever hear of like existentialists, like they literally like believe like we could be like existing right now and then all of a sudden just stop existing at any moment, just because of that fact. So when that happens, also they stop seeing the universe as a whole and they start seeing it as a collection of parts. Now, probably for you that doesn't make, it's like, 6 one way, half a dozen the other. Okay, whatever. But again, once you've removed God and you remove theology, and you start seeing things as a collection of parts, I'll show you later how it becomes more dangerous. So that war had kind of been waged for a long time, and so the separation became more and more, and then science, started making some really good progress. Started making a lot more progress, which was good things. But then, like, you start getting to people like, so the church obviously endorsed and taught what the Bible taught. So, what does the Bible speak of Genesis? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God, 7 days, all that stuff. Well, so there were these other scientists that, as they're doing their research, they start realizing certain things like, okay, like, Copernicus, the Earth's not the center of the universe anymore. It's not the center of our world. He used mathematics to see, like, okay, like, the proportions just don't work out. Are you about to leave us, Sarah Catherine? Thanks for coming, Sarah Catherine. Hey, tune into Instagram Live and you can finish watching.
I am.
Okay. So, he started proposing that. Like I said, Galileo started talking about how, he started talking about gravity and forces and all these different realities. And the church, kind of saw that as not a threat, but it was like for people who, okay, the church's big MO obviously was teaching in faith, because the church is given that, someone said thanks MK for thanks Sarah Catherine for coming. So anyway, so the church obviously is the treasure of faith and has to protect that. But like basically all these people who had made these scientific advances, Galileo, Copernicus, most of them were actually like either like monks or like very religious. Like Galileo would go to mass like daily, stuff like that. So, they were in the church still doing these things. But the church kind of saw that some of the things they began to propose contradicted sort of what Scripture was saying. So again, like, God created the heavens and the earth. So it kind of made it, and then God made the stars. He made the night and day. So the way that Scripture kind of made it portray was like earth is the center. And, Copernicus is like, no, by mathematics, we can tell that the earth's orbits and the way we see things moving in the sky, that it's not these things are moving around us, but we're moving around something else. So he began to propose the heliocentric model. The sun is the center, we're moving around. I won't get too much into that. And so all these, and this is the time of the Renaissance. So they all start kind of making great advances. Then the Renaissance, was this time of like rebirth of science and knowledge. So whenever they started making these claims and the church was still trying to defend her truth, there became this apparent more and more breaking of a gap. And to the world, again, like of the Renaissance, like they were still like in this Cartesian mindset of sort of like thoughts, principles. Okay, that's where we need to put our, put our eggs in that basket, stuff like that. Faith is like still there, and it's kind of like not changing. All right, good. But they started to perceive what they thought were contradictions, and started driving them more and more away. But really, in the end, there were confusions of terms was what it was. So like obviously like in understanding Genesis, the audience was not to a group of scientists. God didn't write the book of Genesis to a group of astronomers. He wrote it to Jews. And he wrote it to Jews that were in a pagan territory that they believed in chaos. And the pagans at that time believed chaos. Chaos is what created everything. And the entire creation came about because there was this big dragon that fought with our god Marduk. And Marduk cut the dragon in half, and then he used one half to create the heavens, the other half to create the earth. And then everything else was created from this dragon's blood. So basically, everything that was created came from chaos. And so ultimately, what Genesis was trying to do wasn't really to try and prove like all the particulars of, the creation, but to show the unity, the harmony of the world. So, God created, and God created with a plan. He created with an order. He created in 7 days, which again for the Jews numerically was a perfect number. Also, in those 7 days, the number of times that Scripture says God said is 10, which is just like the, what else? What else is important for the Jews that deals with 10? Ten Commandments. So the same God who gave the law is the same God who created. So that's, that was what Genesis was trying to teach and trying to promote to the Jews, this reality of the harmonious God of creation is the same harmonious God who gives the law and puts within everything that law of governance and life. But science, again, is dealing with the world. So they're dealing with all this stuff. But Descartes has kind of already, flipped that card over. No pun intended. Descartes, cart, or whatever. Anyway, I just caught myself saying that. All right, so let me fast forward a little bit. In the early 1900s, there was a Belgian priest, you've probably heard of him, Georges Lemaitre, which actually yesterday was his 145th birthday. I think that number is right. Anyway, so he was a Jesuit, so he was a priest, but he was also an astronomer, and he observed that when he would observe the heavens, when he would observe the stars, which at that time had just been discovered. These are not actually stars; these are galaxies. Because Edwin Hubble, so the guy who the Hubble telescope was named after, he was the first guy to actually name, those little blots of light we see up in the sky aren't all stars. Some of them are galaxies. So they're their own little reality up there. So Georges Lemaitre, he started observing these things, and when he would observe these galaxies, he would notice that what would happen to them is, as he's looking at them, there's what's called this this redshift. So you know about the Doppler effect, right? Okay, so you're driving down the street and a train's coming the opposite way, and so light essentially does the same thing, because the reason why that happens is obviously the sound waves getting compressed and stretched. Light does the exact same thing. When it's moving towards you, it's getting compressed. So we'd say it has more of a blue shift to it, because blue, ultraviolet has a more compressed wavelength, whereas red is further out. So when he would observe it, he would notice these things had a red shift, meaning they're moving further away. They're moving away from us. And yes, they are moving themselves, but they are moving. And the entire thing is moving. And this is a galaxy. So this is something that is about 3 billion stars. I mean, it's huge. Is moving away from us. And so it's not just it's spinning like a little top. It's something is moving. So essentially, he started noticing that with other realities too, of that everything is moving away. And so if it's all moving away, then if we, hit rewind, then what does that mean? That it was all coming from something. And he eventually got to the point that he called, there was a point of singularity from which everything ultimately came from and is moving out from. And that eventually became the Big Bang. Because he was able to prove from this point of singularity that there was nothing. And I'll talk a little bit more about nothing later. But that then became that one point from which everything else began to expand outward. And there's an inflation. It's like inflating a balloon. It's just all growing out. And so everything in it, it's not just that they're kind of there's like an explosion, pow, and all this stuff kind of is getting flung, but it's like the very fabric that they're in is expanding outward. So essentially that he began to propose everything that's existing, everything that was created came from that one point, that point of singularity, the Big Bang. And so if y'all saw the picture I put on Instagram, there's actually a picture where he was at a conference presenting on that, and Einstein was there, and Einstein stood up and began to applaud, saying, "This is the most satisfactory explanation of creation I've ever heard." Because Einstein was Jewish, but he was also, he kind of became agnostic. So he kind of became sort of in that scientific mind of if there is a God, we'll never know about him. Because he's out there. He's beyond our ability to know him. So he was kind of agnostic. But he believed, he applauded him for that. And so basically all of science since then has all pointed and said the Big Bang, scientifically is correct. We can't disprove the Big Bang. and it works well. I mean, it fits in perfectly with what we were talking about before. The Big Bang is not just an explosion in space, so it's not like when I was little and I thought about the Big Bang, I thought there was like, a giant comet that was like kind of hovering through space. Then all of a sudden, it just like boom, exploded, and like it had everything in it. It just kind of went everywhere. It was like, no, the Big Bang was an explosion of space and time, everything. So the entire fabric of reality, all of time and space, became and began at that moment. Before that, was nothing. And so, first of all, in understanding physics and understanding science, all of science is able to go and trace all the way back to that point of the Big Bang, but can't go any further. Because, again, the limits of science, the limits of physics can't go beyond it, because there was nothing. And when we talk about, so again, in defining terms, we talk about God being defined as the unmoved mover. Nothing is nothing. And nothing can do nothing. It's not potentially something, it's not halfway something, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing, and it can do nothing. So, something could not have come out of nothing, because nothing doesn't have the ability to do or create or become anything. If there was something that came out of it, then that meant there was something there. I mean, are y'all following that? Like, to get to the basics, to get all the way down, when we say nothing, that's what we're meaning. Absolutely nothing. Sometimes because like, there's one scientist, they asked and said, why does anything exist? And he said, well, because nothing is very unstable. Nothing is unstable, so therefore something had to become created. And I'm like, no, because you're confusing terms. Nothing is nothing. Nothing is not unstable, and nothing can't create something because it's nothing, and it can do nothing. So when we're talking about nothing, that's what it is. Boom. God, though, existed, and he brought everything into being. So he was the unmoved mover outside of all that, not part of his creation. And so nothing else put anything to motion but him. So that's when we say creation came, when we say ex nihilo, which means from nothing. So again, God didn't have a secondary cause that he created something with. God didn't was walking through the universe and stumbled upon like a big, ball of Play-Doh and started making something. No, absolutely from nothing. And so when Scripture says, like, in the beginning God said, "Let there be light," we believe like in that moment, he created everything. So that's kind of been essentially the basis of science, of kind of philosophy, and also of sort of like the debate. I'll get more into the debate a little bit more. But, essentially the church very recently, especially with John Paul II, has made a lot of moves to say, John Paul II actually apologized to the entire scientific community for what the church did with Galileo. He said, we have to call a spade, and said we were wrong. We were wrong in putting him under house arrest and doing all the things we did to Galileo, because it's been very hurtful to the science community now. It's been very hurtful to our own endeavor. And the church has to kind of see a union of the two and has to sort of work with those two realities of faith and reason. And so what's kind of happened, the world we're living in right now is kind of, so the church is sort of trying to bridge that gap, but most of the science we're living in is still living in that sphere that Descartes created as, is that like it is the all-encompassing, all-knowing, and again at the top for Descartes. Well, so remember what we said was at the bottom of the triangle naturally, senses, the empirical, what we know, and touch. But when Descartes did it, that became the final say-so. The final say-so for Descartes and all of science was, in the end, what I can see, touch, sense. Bam. And that confirms what I know in my head. So my mind thinks something, and then I prove by what I touch. That's how Descartes sees it. But in reality, it's the other way around, right? Like, a baby doesn't, think of, I think milk. Milk, I know. I know what milk is. I touched it, and then finally the last thing he does is he touches and tastes it. Milk. Finally, I have milk. Mommy, give me a bottle. It's not. It's. No, it's the other way around. Like baby has a hunger. His body pines for it, and then he tastes and he receives and he senses that, and then over time he's able to build up to the concept of milk, right? So Descartes kind of did the other way around, and that's kind of sort of how science works. That's sort of the premise that a lot of these atheist scientists work under, is that we know, we understand, and then we test that by what we can empirically see and feel and experience, and that's how we prove it's true. And so, what makes that problematic about God under that model? If the final say-so, the final definer of truth is what we can see, touch, feel, and experience, what then becomes problematic about God with that? Remember? Amen, sister. Yes. Because God exists outside. We can't see and touch and sin. We can't put him to the test. So we can't put God to the scientific method test. We can't put him under the lens and the microscope that we put every other hypothesis under. Even though that's the way the world works, even though that's kind of the structure and the final say-so of the world, we can't do that to God. But keep in mind that happened because of Descartes, that change, that switch. So scientists will make that argument. They'll make that, like, if it's going to be true, I've got to be able to touch it and sense it and feel it and everything, or it's not true. But it's like, that's not the final say-so. That's really the first say-so, but they have made it the top. So is that kind of clear? So that's really, really important to understand when you get into these debates. When people start saying like, well, can you prove it? Can you touch it? Can you feel it? Stuff like that. Well, it's at the end of the day, it's they're putting the wagon before the horse type thing. It's like they're working on the premises of what they know, what they've understand, and everything, and then finally they're testing it by touching it and feeling it and all that stuff. So it's easy for them, if they've done it the opposite way, to again just knock God out of the equation, throw him out the back, and then put the last test of the touching and feeling and sensing. But that, in the end, all that does is limit us and can experience what's there. So that's why we get in this materialistic science of it's only what I see, it's only what I touch, it's only what I experience. That's all that I know is real. Because in my mind, I've made that thought and I've worked on that premise. Which is really funny because that premise of, the only thing that is real and is true is what I can see and touch and taste cannot be tested, observed, tried, felt, sensed. It can't be because, again, that's what they put. It was the first thing. That was a thought. That was an idea. That was a principle that they put in their head, and then they worked the touching and feeling and everything. But they can't actually test that. They can't actually test that principle. Does that make sense? So again, like, that's kind of one of the first thing you can throw out is like if they're like, well, prove it to me, touch it, feel it, let me see it. The question back is like, how do you prove that is true and that is real and that is the only way to know things? And it's like, how did you test your principle that all that we can know is true is what we can sense, feel, and taste? And most of them at that point will, because someone told me that. Oh, someone told you? But wait, I thought you could only believe it if you touched it and sensed it and felt it and knew that it was true because you observed it. They're like, eventually, like, that's where, like, kind of you'll get a breakdown. And, you have to get to this point of, like, agreeing of, like, okay, to understand and know something, we have to be able to sense it. Basically, we have to trust our senses. We can trust that, but not the way you're putting it. You're putting it as the last rung of the ladder. It has to be first. Does that kind of make sense? All that. Okay. Do you have any questions? I know.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Kind of like emotion you can sense, but you can't physically touch it. You
right.
can't, but you know that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I totally get what you're saying, but I totally don't.
Okay. What seems to be the hardest thing?
Just the whole like responding thing. Like I
Right.
know what you mean, but at the same time, like
You don't
if
know
I
it.
were in that position, I'd not know what to say.
Right. And I'll get a little bit more into the debate, in a second, but to kind of like actually like kind of how does some of these debates work in real life, and sort of what you can say and do. But does anyone have any questions just about kind of like the layout that I said? Molly,
Yeah, kind of like wow.
kind of like whoa.
Yeah.
Does anybody in there have anything they want to say? There's 7 people observing right
I'm
now.
gonna get a coffee really quick.
Go
But
get a
y'all can
coffee.
y'all can keep talking.
All right. So, I'll wait till she gets back before I kind of get into like the response. But what we're dealing with a lot is let me see. Oh yeah. If someone asks, "How do you know God is real?" What is a good argument to start with? So how do you know God is real? It's kind of what we've talked about. So, again, the first thing is to establish kind of that principle we're working under. That like, all right, I can trust my senses and I can trust what I'm going to see and I can observe and I can trust that will give me truth, but that's not the final say-so. That's not going to be the final say-so of truth. And so starting with, there's several different ways you can start with. One of the easiest one is seeing the order and harmony that does exist in creation. So many people want to see that there is it's chaos and things are just happen to do this stuff because they just so happen to do it. And it's like, okay, what seems to make a greater connection of, that all this stuff just is randomly doing all this and just so happens to like falling together. Like a lot of philosophers believe, they've kind of gotten into like certain theories that I'm sure you've heard of, is that the universe is infinite. It has always existed. It's always been around. And so essentially what they say is it's the monkey argument. So essentially they say like if you put 5,000 monkeys in a room with a typewriter, each one of them having a typewriter, and for all eternity they were in that room with those typewriters, eventually one of those monkeys would type Shakespeare. It's just a complete total, by chance that eventually one of those monkeys, by screaming and bouncing around, would type Shakespeare. After, 18 billion years of them being in that room with those typewriters, according to them, would eventually type Shakespeare. I don't know why did I bring that up? So essentially, that's kind of the view of chaos and chance, is that, all this stuff that we see in our world, we're just experiencing that final one little moment when the monkey eventually types Shakespeare. And we're just kind of living in this momentary blurb of, it's going to be swept by. And so that's why like kind of evolution is kind of a big thing with that, because we're eventually going to be surpassed, or eventually, like we're going to all implode or something like that. Because there's no guiding force. There's nothing keeping it together. There's no harm. There's no reason. That's the view of chaos. But again, that all started with a mind, with their thought, and then they, went outward the other way to try and feel and experience and propose it. But again, even that they can't really test. But we can test, and we've proven, and seen for thousands of years, is like, okay, trees grow a certain way. You will not all of a sudden have a great white shark grow out of the ground and start, producing little rocks. Like it's not going to happen. I'm not going to take an apple seed and put it in the ground and all of a sudden, a human being will grow out of it. It's not going to happen. Things, again, I can trust and have a harmony and have an end. They have all that works together. And so again, like the creation can point back to a creator. The fact that all these things exist, the fact that there is existence, that things work in a certain way with a certain harmony, is a proof of a creator. Again, kind of going back to that image, that's one of the things I can say that there was a creator, is that this painting has a certain order to it, a certain harmony. There is a creation. Again, the fact of there being things set in motion, there being movement, there being things that have been moved and by science say must be